I like this topic, and we got buyer's remorse upcoming in 20 minutes. I already expressed some of my own buyer's remorse. But how do you feel now personally? And we'll ask the guys, I'll give my opinion in a second, and you can share this with me. How do you feel now about Russell Wilson? My feelings about Russell Wilson for a long time have been super cheesy, not really relatable. Uh, you know, almost like a caricature of what a star quarterback is supposed to be, right? Like there's just no real person there, but always really good at throwing on the move. And every Russell Wilson game in Seattle seemed to be on repeat. It was Russell would have the ball, they'd be down a couple points, and he'd run around and make plays, and more often than not, they'd win games. There'd be a lot of pedestrian stuff during the meat of the game, and then end of the game, he'd find a way to pull a rabbit out of his backside. But that's generally, and I know there's more to it than that, but that's kind of the 30,000 feet belief. And Dan, respectfully, because Dan watched every one of his games, he's a huge Seahawk fan and has a far more educated opinion on Russell Wilson than I have. But I will say that if you asked me before last night or before he got the starting job back, and I said it on the radio, did I think Russell Wilson is quote-unquote good? I'd say no. I think he's past his prime. I don't think that he's a guy who you can count on. I don't think the Steelers have their quarterback for next year. And then last night he played really well. Which, did it make me rethink my position? Of course. Of course. What I've never understood about politicians is very few of them have the ability to go like, 20 years ago, you said like, yeah, it was 20 years ago. I've rethought my positions. The world, life has changed. I've changed. The world has changed. And some of the semantics of these things have changed. Very reasonable. It doesn't mean that I'm coming down off of my high horse thinking, you know what, I was wrong. Russell Wilson's going to be the starter for the next 10 years in Pittsburgh until he chooses to retire. But if he plays as well as he played last night, then you got a starting quarterback. What I think we're going to find is what you find from so many of these older players. And I'll relate it to, the best one is Shaquille O'Neal. Do you guys remember when the Miami Heat beat the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA Finals? That NBA Finals, Shaq was on the Heat. Most of the discussion was over Dwayne Wade, the MVP. Anytime he did anything, he got to the free throw line. Like the free throw disparity was just ridiculous. It's like the NBA liked Dwayne Wade so much they wanted to make him into a superstar. That's what a lot of people thought. But what's lost in it was, remember, Shaq was on that team as well. And Shaq only had, it was a 6-game series, he had one dominant Shaquille O'Neal game. So what happens when you age is you don't just usually go from being good to off a cliff. You go from being good to, well, and look, even when you're great, even when you're Mahomes, like Mahomes, 4 games in 5, he's incredible. 1 game in 5, 1 game in 10, he might be like, man, Mahomes was bad today. And then the best of the best find a way, even when they're bad, to somehow figure it out and keep you competitive at the end. He does that really well. The ratio changes slowly over time. The point is that if you go back to previous NBA Finals and the NBA Finals MVP, if the Lakers played 4 or 5 games, 3 or 4 of those games, he would be dominant Shaquille O'Neal. When he was longer in the tooth, his last NBA Finals with the Miami Heat, it was 1 out of 6 games when he was Shaquille O'Neal. And after that, couldn't really help you. I think this is more of a ratio thing with Russell Wilson. You go back 3, 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, it was 3 games in 5 to 4 games in 5 that he was really, really good. Maybe one of those 4, he was outstanding. Maybe 2 of those 4, he came through late in the game with the play, even if he was just average during the regular meat of the game. And now, a couple years later, we're into he's had 2 starts. Last game was This game is pretty good. And if we have 5 starts, there might be 1 more pretty good and 2 more Very rarely do you go from being an all-pro, Pro Bowl level quarterback to can't play dead. Now, look, once it goes, it's gone. It's not coming back. But I don't think it's gone. I just think he's not as athletic as he used to be. He's obviously lost some weight. They simplified the playbook because he does have a tendency to hold on to it too much. And he's got some talent around him. They established a running game. He was good last night. But they're not going to hand him the ball and say, go empty backfield and go oop-de-oop and let him just pick and choose and pick a team apart. That's not who he is. Byer, you've seen at least 10x the number of Russell Wilson games I've seen. What are your thoughts on him?
Well, this whole scenario, and it's not even the Russell Wilson specifically. I think that's even a part of this whole scenario. It's, number one, Russell Wilson having the success that he's had in the last couple of games has shown just again on how much the NFL is dependent on the passing game and quarterbacks in the National Football League. We thought Justin Fields was fine, and Justin Fields, could have served the Steelers well, but it is a difference when you can just throw the football downfield and have someone, do it in a competent fashion. You're correct. He is not the same quarterback that he was with the Seattle Seahawks. Never will be. The mobility is not there. There's not going to be any runs for Russell Wilson. When he tried to run last night, it was a disaster, in fact. So that's off the charts. But to your point, if he can just play well enough, whether it be in 3 of 5 games or 4 of 5 games, and get the ball to George Pickens and get the ball to Pat Freiermuth, and Najee Harris continues to run like he does, they're going to be fine. And they're going to be in the thick of it now with the, again, expanded playoff. Maybe this will be the last year I say expanded playoff because it had been there for a while, but mediocre teams get into the playoffs. And when you're sitting there at 6-2 right now and you're leading the division, I'm sure they feel they have bigger fish to fry, but worst case scenario, they should be right there for a wild card at the end of the year. So
I agree with you on all of those fronts.
Can I give you another layer of this?
Go.
Because it has to do, and I actually said this on the I Want Your Flex podcast as well. The Pittsburgh Steelers are who the New York Jets wanted to be. And you had a defense, you needed to just have something on offense. You needed to have some capability of your quarterback to be able to do something with a good running back and a target at wide receiver that you need to get the football to. And this is before the Devontae Adams trade. But be a defensive football team, and when your quarterback needs to make plays, he has experience making plays. And it's been the exact opposite for the New York Jets, and it has worked for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The way that Pittsburgh won the game last night is a way that I think that the New York Jets would have loved to have won a game. And if you needed Aaron Rodgers to go and save the day, then maybe he could, but that ship has seemed to pass. Their defense has completely fallen off, while Pittsburgh is thriving at 6-2 with a recipe that isn't too different than what the New York Jets wanted to do.
I don't know if I understand what you're saying about playing off of their defense, but they didn't try and build running game first. They didn't, and I think acquiescing to Aaron Rodgers so much offensively proved that it was a bad plan. So I guess I'm going to agree and disagree, or maybe agree, but their plan was so out of whack, right? Like
this is who they should be. But to
it's
your
who
point,
they should be.
yes.
By the way, it's who the Green Bay Packers defense wasn't good enough. But if you saw what made him into a multi-time MVP in the last stint with the Packers, once they changed coaches, they became a team that ran the football a ton.
Yes.
They had a late 30s quarterback, and they ran a ton, and he hated it because he didn't understand exactly where he is. Now they're like Aaron Rodgers wanted to be the old Aaron Rodgers and run the old Aaron Rodgers offense, and one, it's a little bit arcane. Two, he's not good enough anymore. Like, he's not that guy. He's just not.
Yeah. This was their recipe for success. And you're
not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
No, I mean, like, look, I was watching the Lakers last night, and LeBron looked old last night. He just did. He got shut down really by the kid from Virginia, who's a really good rookie pro. I forget his name. I like him. And it was a weird game where the Suns got out to a lead and the Lakers had a lead, and I would actually say that I do think that on some level, LeBron, even though he can't help himself, he knows like Anthony Davis is probably the best or second best player in the league when he's healthy. He's right. He's unbelievable. And they have a couple of other dudes who maybe not at the level that Anthony Davis or LeBron James or whatever are, but they got a couple others that can really, really play. I mean, actually, one other that can really, really play in Austin Reeves. But I think LeBron is smartly, for the most part, he takes like, hey, I'm the third best player on this thing. I just am. And that's what Russell Wilson is kind of playing like. Like it's the defense, it's the running game, and it's let me just make enough plays and get it out to guys. Whereas Aaron Rodgers is still in the mindset of, if I play well, we're going to win. Like it's just not possible at your age coming off of this injury. That's just not who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with your point. I just think their whole plan was so out of whack, and that's why they are where they are.
This is the point that I made. Maybe my word choice wasn't great. This was the path to success for the New York Jets.
Yeah. No, you.
Yeah.
I understood it, and I actually agree with you. I think that it's really interesting when people don't know who they are. Franchises don't know who they are. And by the way, it's probably why the Pittsburgh Steelers have been so successful for so long. Is that, hey, like, we don't have a quarterback. Like, all right, so let's build up a sick defense, get a good running game, see what we can do, and play off the defense. And we just get good enough quarterback play. I mean, that's really what Mason Rudolph did last year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Mason's a friend of mine, but let's not act like Mason Rudolph is Johnny Unitas, right? But he was just competent enough to get them to win games. It became harder this year, and they felt like they needed a little bit more. And Russell Wilson last night gave them a little bit more. So you're absolutely right. And it's going to be – I'm really interested by what so many of these teams that need a quarterback do this offseason. Who said Jameis Winston yesterday? Who said somebody should pick up Jameis Winston? Don't remember if that was our show. I've listened to a lot of sports. But, like, these trends, we went through everybody trying to get a rookie quarterback, and especially a rookie quarterback outside the first round. And then you look at Baker, you look at Flacco, you look at even Jameis this year. You look at some of these. We point out Geno is not necessarily the problem in Seattle. There's a world there where you get those middle class quarterbacks that have achieved something or failed somewhere else. And yeah, you're not going to be able to pay them $1 million a year, but you don't have to pay them 30 or 40 and 50, and you put a good team around them. You got to know who you are, as I think Dan pointed out. And if you have a really good defense, get competent quarterback play, be conservative offensively, just explosive enough to take advantage of it. But that's the recipe for success. That's the roadmap to success, and it should have been for the Jets, and they chose to go a different